Hey everybody, today I thought I'd give my testimony. I've been asked quite a few times about how did you get where you are today and what was it that made you come out of the churches. So today I thought I'd talk about that. Shalom everybody and welcome to Beit Tefillah. I've been asked quite a few times lately, what was it? What was the impetus that drove you out from the church and got you walking in the path of Torah? And you ended up walking with your wife and your son and his wife, and what exactly happened? What was it that got you to see the truth and to come out? So I'm going to start from the beginning. And if this is not something you want to see, this isn't one of my regular teachings, then stop the video and I'll catch you on the next one. But if you're interested in it, because I've been asked by quite a few people, maybe you'll see your story and my story a little bit, or maybe it can help somebody else. I don't know. But I figured that's what I'd do. So at the very beginning, I was born and raised in Northern Illinois. And from a very young age, far back as I can remember, we were attending a Lutheran church in a very small town. And the pastor who was a pastor of that church was probably a Baptist preacher before he became Lutheran, because he sure liked the old fire and brimstone method. And my dad liked to sit up in the very front pew. So here I am, probably 4 or 5 years old, and the pastor in the pulpit is just looming over the top of me, and I'm looking up at him, and he's literally screaming at us on how we're all going to die and burn in hell forever and ever. Scared the tar out of me. My sister, too, is a couple years younger than me, so we stopped going to that church because every Sunday my mom's dressing us and we're crying, Mom, we don't want to go listen to this scary man. So anyway, we started going to another church where the pastor is a little bit friendlier. So this other pastor comes over one day and asks my mom, why aren't you coming to our church anymore? And she told him, frankly, you're scaring my children. So he quit that church shortly after that and moved on. But anyway. So anyway, we're in this other Lutheran church now, and that was a church that I was raised up in. I went Sunday school there. I was in youth group. I was a youth group president. I became confirmed in that church, and then I was the acolyte, lighting the candles, and I was ringing the bell and the narthex, during the Lord's Prayer and all that. And I thought I was a holy roller. I became a trustee. I had my own vacation Bible school class. I was helping teach Sunday school. I was really into it at the time. And right after I graduated high school, I got together with this pretty little girl named Gina, who's now my wife. We've been together for 33 years as I'm sitting here talking about this. And we found out that we had a lot in common. I knew her since she was in kindergarten and I was in first grade. We were in a very small town. And actually, we didn't live in town. I grew up in the country. And the closest town to me was only 200 people. But there was the next bigger town where the school was. So I've known my wife for a very long time. And we didn't get along very well in school. I thought she was pretty, but anyway, it's funny how life works, but that's a different video. So anyway, she was trying to tell me about keeping the Sabbath. I really didn't want to hear about it because my thought at the time was, well, everybody on the planet goes to church on Sunday. You can't tell me. They're all wrong, so I didn't want to hear it. That was stupid, but anyway, I'm just being honest, okay? But I was about 4 months out of high school, and I was working for my dad. I worked for my dad for about 10 years, but about 4 months out of high school, I broke my back in at least 4 places. And lower 4 vertebrae in my spine, and it was a fracture like this. It was a compression fracture. It wasn't like this, or it wasn't like this. It was a compression fracture where it fractured them down the vertebrae, and I severely compressed 5 discs. And I was laid up pretty bad for about 6 months. I couldn't lift anything heavier than a glass of milk. And the old doctor I saw, who was probably 100 at the time, not really, but he was pretty old, he said, you're going to have a lot of problems later in life from it. So, but I healed up, and then I was able to go back to work, and life kind of went on. So anyway, Gina and I, we were married in that same church, and then when Mitch was born, our son, he was baptized in that church. And about 5 years later, we decided to move to Florida. I had gone to Florida quite a bit with my parents when we were vacationing. We went to a few different places, but Florida was always my favorite. I love the ocean. I grew up in landlocked Illinois, and I didn't like it. It was so flat, if you stood in one place for long enough, you could see the back of your head. I'm sure you've all heard that saying, but that's what it was like. Even though the cornfields have a beauty all their own, and I was just there a few months ago, and I love seeing it still, but I love the ocean. I guess you always want what you can't have, so I wanted to be by the beach, and I love fishing in the water. I love collecting seashells. I love snorkeling and diving and everything to do with the ocean, so that's where I wanted to go. But anyway, before we moved to Florida, Gina was still on me about the Sabbath, so I said, okay, I need to talk to our pastor about it. So we knew we were going, so I wanted to talk to this guy because I trusted him. I knew him way before he was a pastor, when he was just the guy who owned the local pet store. So a real nice guy. So I said, hey, I need to talk to you about something scriptural. So he comes over one night, and he's carrying all his bags in the door and sits down and says, what can I do you for, Scott? And I said, okay, about this whole Sabbath thing. It says here in the Bible it's forever. Why does Christianity keep Sunday instead of the Sabbath? And suddenly he's like, hey, look at the time, I gotta go. So he leaves, and that should have been a big clue for me, but it took me another 15 years before that was really in front of my face again, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. So anyway, Mitch is 5 years old, and we moved to Florida. Right after we moved to Florida, he started kindergarten, and I got on with the career that I always wanted to do, and now I could go to the beach every weekend, and I was really loving life. So I got so distracted with doing that I forgot all about church and I forgot all about religion, and I was off doing my own thing. I started drinking very heavily, and I was smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, and I was very worldly, and I was the life of the party. I was clearly not doing what the Creator wanted me to do, obviously. So after being in Florida and doing this for about 10 years, I guess, and my career was going very well, I felt this pull to come back towards Elohim. And so, still not really reading the Bible much or doing anything, I just figured, I guess I'm supposed to come back to the church. So we became members of a Methodist church for the simple reason that it was the closest one to our house. I'm just going to be honest with you. And I could sit in the very back, so as soon as the church was over, I could be the first one out the door and hop in the car and light up a cigarette, so I go home and start working on the yard or whatever I was going to do. I'm just being honest. But my back was getting progressively worse at this time, and I knew one day soon I was going to have to face the music. And it was hard for me. I was in a very pigeonholed specific career that I was making pretty good money, but I couldn't really go do anything else, and it was a very physical, demanding job. But I knew I had to keep doing that, so I was kind of trapped. When you're making a mortgage payment, we had built a new house in '99, and I love that house. And it wasn't a huge house. It was a modest little house. It was only about 1,400 square feet. But I really loved that little house. I was very proud of it, and I almost made that house my idol. Everything that I did, I took care of that house better than I was taking care of my health or anything. And that's not good as far as the Creator is concerned. But so I was living in the state that I always wanted to live in. I was doing the hobbies that I always wanted to do. And I had the house that I always wanted to have. And my job paid well, but my job was kind of a way for me to finance my hobbies, because I was always into adventures and photography and fishing and shelling and diving and everything that I talked about. So my back is getting worse. I'm getting scared now because I know I can't keep doing what I always did, so I knew I was going to lose the house. And then very sudden, I no longer liked Florida. I didn't want to do those hobbies anymore. While it had been my dream forever to live there and do exactly what I was doing and do all my hobbies, the whole thing just seemed kind of soured to me. And then right after I started feeling like this, and within a few weeks' time, I was laid off of my job, my best friend committed suicide, our dog had to be put to sleep because he got ill, our car was totaled by some lady who rammed into it when it was just sitting by our mailbox, and when I was laid off, I put in my resume at 13 different places, and most of these were places that had tried to hire me away from all my current jobs and told me, if you ever need a job, call us, and you got one. Not one single person would call me back. Nobody returned my call, and I couldn't figure it out. I'm like, what's going on? I mean, I had an impeccable work record, and I was not a job hopper. I stayed at my job for years, and then for some reason management changed and I had to switch or whatever. This was the Elohim working, and I didn't realize it at the time. But at the same time, I was also involved in another hobby where I had bought something on eBay, and it was part 2 of a two-part series, and a guy contacted me that I outbid, and he had part 1. And he said, look, why don't I copy part 1, you copy part 2, and we'll trade. Well, this guy just happened to be living in western Arkansas, where we live now. So we started talking, you know, small talk here and there, and slowly it built up to a friendship. Turned out he had a bad back too, and almost had the same accident that I did. We had very similar things going on in our lives. And he was telling me about how cheap the housing was in this part of the country. So I was like, great, let me, you know, go talk to my wife and say, hey, maybe we can sell our house in Florida. We can make a profit because we've been in it almost 6 years, and maybe we can get something in Arkansas. So I go to Gina and I start telling her about this, and she's got this look on her face, and she says to me 2 things. First of all, she says, where is Arkansas? And then when she finds out, she says, I am not moving to Arkansas. So I was really depressed at this point in time, and I didn't know what to do. So a day or 2 later, I woke up in the morning wondering what's going to go on. And Gina, she's all happy. And she had been on the internet, and she's looking up real estate listings in western Arkansas, in the area we wanted to move to. And she's like, you won't believe how beautiful it is there. I want to move there. So this was crazy. First, the Father had changed my heart and wanted me out of Florida and made me not want to have anything to do with it. And then in just a couple days' time, he changed Gina's heart and made her want to move to Arkansas. So this is wonderful. So we decided to list our house. So, you know, it wasn't very old. It was less than 6 years old, so there wasn't much work that needed to be done to it. So the realtor came over to list our house, and we were going to sign the contract, and it was going to go on the market the next morning. So he comes over and he sits down and he's got the contract. He's like, okay, Mr. Sheba, I need you to sign here, and this is the agreed on price. And I had a little feeling coming to my head, and it said, you need to mark that house up quite a bit more money. So when I scratched out the agreed on price and I wrote in the new price. And I don't know what made me do that. It was just something that said, you need to do that. And it wasn't a matter of greed. It just happened so quick. I just said, you need to do that. So he got all upset, and he said, it's going to sit. It's going to sit. So we grabbed the contract, said, fine, we'll list it the next morning, and out he goes. So 9 o'clock the next morning, knock on the door. It's a realtor, different one. He shows up with this young couple. They want to see the house. Okay, let him in. They walk around the house. They're there for about an hour and a half. I had a lot of fruit trees and different things in the backyard, some citrus, and I was explaining what that was and stuff like that. So he thanks me for my time. The young couple start walking out of the house. He starts going out the front door. He turns back in. He sticks his face in the front door and said, I just sold your house. And it had been on the market for about an hour and a half. So my realtor calls me an hour later, says, you're not going to believe what happened. I said, yeah, the house sold. He's like, how'd you know? I said, well, the guy told me. He said, did you know they gave you the asking price? They didn't even haggle price. They just said, we'll take it. We'll pay them what they want. So that was one little miracle. And that kind of figured into a bigger part of it later. So anyway, we're like, wow, I guess we better go to Arkansas and find a house. So first we're like, oh great, Mitch is still in high school. He's almost ready to graduate, but it's still a few months away. But he's been taking these extra classes, so I'm like, I need to call his school and find out how many more days does he have to go. Do we have to get a temporary place? We have to rent an apartment and put our junk in storage before we can move. So I called the school, and I explained the situation. I said, how many more days does Mitch have to go to school before he can graduate, before he's got enough credits? So she said, well, let me put you on hold and go find out. So she comes back and she says, tomorrow. If he goes through tomorrow, that's all. And we said, you're serious? So that was another miracle. And all these miracles happened. I wish I could remember them all, and I can't remember them all, but it was just one after the other, after the other, after the other. It was clearly, once Elohim decided to move us, he wasn't playing around, and he wanted to go real fast. So anyway, we come to Arkansas. We come to the house that we have now, and we had picked out about 25 places we wanted a realtor. We called her in advance, so hey, we're going to be coming up there. And so anyway, the house we're living in now, I really liked it. It's out in the country, and I wanted to get out of the chaos. We had lived in Tampa for a long time, and I wanted to get out of the chaos of the city. And Gina liked the house in town because it had just gone through a renovation, and we knew we were going to have to renovate the house we currently own. So she liked the thought that it was pretty much done. And I like that thought too. I wasn't crazy about being in town, but it's not a very big town here. So, but the problem was the house had to be divided from another house in the lot. And the realtor said, don't worry, the guy who owns this, he has a lot of clout in this town. We'll just be able to split that off. So you put in a bid, fine. Well, she calls us up the next day and she says, I don't understand it. They won't let him split that lot. You have to buy 2 houses. We're like, we don't need 2 houses. And we're like, sorry. So we got the house that we're in, and it turned out for the best because of all these other reasons that I won't go into now. So that was another miracle that had happened. And these things just kept happening and happening and happening like that. It was just no coincidence. So we go back to Florida, and we have to hurry up and pack and get out because the people wanted to close within 30 days. So now we get back, and we've got just like 2.5 weeks to pack and get out. So I was still very depressed, after all this stuff had happened. But I had a feeling that we were supposed to go to Arkansas, and I was supposed to shut my mouth and listen. And I didn't know what that meant. It was just a feeling that I had that you're moving on to another phase of your life now. You got to do all this other stuff you wanted to do in Florida. For 14 years, you got to go to Florida and do all your hobbies and have all this. But now something else is going to happen. I want you to go, and I want you to be quiet, and I want you to listen. I didn't know what that meant. So we move here. About a month later, I run into the Super Walmart, and I'm shopping there. And at the time, they don't have it anymore, but they had this community bulletin board where they give away free books and stuff. And we're all avid readers. And I saw a book there on the Sabbath. And I'm not going to go into the name of this book because I met the author, and she's a sweet lady, as I said in one of my other videos, but she's still part of a lawless religion, and so I don't want to promote that book. But anyway, this book was specifically about the Sabbath and how modern religion changed it. And so I brought it home, and I gave it to my wife, and I said, here, honey, I want you to read this book, and maybe you'll like it. It's a free book. So she read it. So this is one of the few times that she came to me after that, and she grabbed my face in her hands very softly, and she said, listen, please do me a favor and read this book. Just read it. It's a thin book, and if we don't even have to talk about it if you don't want to. If you don't like it, you can throw the book away. Just read it for me. So I didn't know if it was my wife I was supposed to listen to or whatever. I said, okay. So I read this book, and immediately I was convicted that we had to start keeping the Sabbath. As a matter of fact, I was so enraged. I was upset and furious that Hasatan had used modern religion to change the day of rest that the Creator said was forever. I was furious. But I was also a little bit scared because now I'm thinking in my heart, if that day was changed, what else was changed? So, because she grew up Seventh-day Adventist and they keep the Sabbath, the next logical step for us, join the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So they had one in our town here where we moved, so we run in and we join that church. So then right away, being a guy from Florida for 14 years and eating my weight every year in crab and shrimp and oysters and catfish and shark, can't eat that anymore. And I can't have bacon. And I can't have my baby back ribs and ham, honey-baked ham and all that. So that was a little bit hard at first. Yeah, I'll admit it. It is for most people. But once I found out that that was, messed up through Christianity too, then I had more of a hunger for the truth than I did for these unclean meats. So, and for the fact that I could still eat venison, I can still eat steak, I can still eat cheese, and there was plenty of stuff I can still eat that I really love, which is a lot of vegetables and stuff anyway. It's like, okay, whatever. Plus I was, in a way I was kind of sick of shrimp and oysters because I ate so much of that anyway. We used to catch that for free out there in the Gulf, and anyway. So, now we're eating pretty good. Seventh-day Adventists don't eat 100% Tahor, but pretty close. They don't keep the Sabbath 100% like they should because they were still going out for breakfast after church on the Sabbath. So they're still spending money and they're still making other people work for them. So they keep a pseudo-Sabbath, but at the time we thought, well, we're doing it better. At least we're going to church on Saturday now, right? So anyway, we're doing this for a couple of years. But we're in the church, and we got baptized by full immersion this time. So I thought, well, that was kind of special. But I'm wondering, what else? What else? And there was nothing else. They were pretty much doing what the Lutherans did, doing what the Methodists did, but they're doing it on a different day, and they changed their diet. That was about it. And they're reading out of these books by Ellen White at the same time they're reading out of the scriptures from the pulpit, which bothered me a little bit. I'm like, why are you putting her books up there at the same level as the scriptures? I didn't like that at all. So, anyway, one day our pastor came over to see us. We were losing a little bit of interest in the church because we weren't learning anything else. I'm like, there's got to be more than that. So the pastor comes over to see us. It's probably right around, Christmas time, and we had a Christmas tree up in the house. And so he walks in the house and he looks over and he says, "Hi, you got a tree and everything, huh?" I thought, what a weird thing for a pastor to say. What's the big deal about a Christmas tree? So I said to him, "Why would you say that?" And he said, "Oh, I shouldn't have said anything. Don't worry about it." So he came over, we did a little bit of talk, and then before he left, I said, "Look, I need to know, why did you say that about our Christmas tree?" He said, "Because I believe it's pagan, and if it wasn't for my wife, I wouldn't have anything to do with it, and I said too much already, I gotta go." So he leaves. So, what do? I run off, type into Google, what's pagan about Christmas? Good grief, I'm finding about Christmas, I'm finding about Easter, I'm finding about all this pagan nonsense. So, but this is still truth coming in, so we're learning. So naturally, we're gravitating towards truth, because we had walked in darkness for long enough. So no matter how hard it is, Christmas had to go and Easter had to go. The rest of the family didn't like that at all. Holy cow, they still don't. But, I mean, this was quite a few years ago. And, wow, that was like telling them, I'm not even... They didn't like that at all. They were just nuts. They couldn't believe that, oh, you're going to wreck the family and just, what are you doing? And it's all about Jesus' birthday. And it was just insane. They didn't get it at all. So anyway, we're like, well, we're trying to keep what the scriptures say, and you guys are doing things that aren't even in the scripture, and you can't see the insanity of that? Nothing. So, but anyway, we still didn't know about keeping all these other feasts, Passover and unleavened bread and Sukkot, Shavuot and all that, because we were always taught they were Jewish. So one of the biggest things that hit me was our pastor knew Christmas and Easter were pagan. He wouldn't have anything to do with it, but yet he's not teaching his congregation the truth. So after we came into the truth about all the pagan holidays, we said, we're not going to go to that church anymore. So we left the Seventh-day Adventist church. Right about that time, well, Mitch was getting, he was probably, in his early 20s. And right at about that time, Mitch, my wife, and I were very sick of religion. It seemed like every religion we turned to, there were lies in it. So we said, you know what, we're going to stay out of religion, and we're just going to do something novel. We're actually going to read this. We're going to read the Word and see what it says. So that's what we started to do. We just got rid of all the religious stuff and just started reading the Word. So one of the things we started reading was that around, just before Passover, you have to get the leaven out of your house. So we got all the stuff with yeast in it, got the yeast in the bread and the rolls and all that stuff, and just got it out of the house. And that was all we did for the first 2 years. And so I look back on that and I'm thinking, why didn't we just keep reading? Why didn't we do the Feast of Unleavened Bread and all that? But see, we still didn't know that the feasts were for us, but we're trying to obey. But see, we were already getting the leaven out of our house, so the Father could see we were trying to obey. We were getting rid of religion. We were getting rid of, the leaven doesn't represent sin. The leaven represents false doctrine or traditions of men that can lead you to sin. So we're already spiritually and physically getting that out of our lives. So for 2 years in a row we did that. And then all of a sudden, when the truth came, it just hit us like a pile of bricks. And it came really fast. And it was overwhelming. All the stuff that was coming to us, all the truth. And there weren't all these books and videos out there like there are today about, hey, what to do when you leave the church, and you can do this and you can do that. There wasn't all that. So anyway, Mitch had found this teacher who was teaching out of Texas, and he was doing Torah portions. And well, what's a Torah portion, right? So we started getting into Torah portions, and we were reading this, and we lived and we breathed those teachings. That was all we had for 2 years. We went through 2 complete cycles of learning that, and he went really into why we have to obey, and he was just drilling it into our heads, and we have to do what the Word says, and this is what the Mashiach taught, and it was really a good foundation for us. He was a really sweet guy. He actually died quite a few years ago, so by the time we were really getting into the teachings, he had already passed on, which is sad, because I would love to meet him. I'll meet him someday, I'm sure, but so anyway, we started branching off into different topics, because even though he was keeping the feast, there was a lot that he didn't allow himself to say. It's like he'd start going there and he'd say, well, I'm not gonna. So it was like, no, finish that thought. So I guess he was afraid of offending people with certain things he was saying. He was trying to keep it very basic and not veer to, you could tell he wanted to. You could tell if you could have got a chance to talk to him in person, well, he'd have really filled you up with a lot of truth. But what was coming across on the videos, what was coming across on YouTube, he was holding back. So once we realized, hey, we got to start keeping the feast, we started keeping the feast, and that was such a wonderful thing to start learning about that and to see how prophetic it was of the Messiah. And so at this time, it's me, my wife Gina, and our son Mitch, who was still living at home at the time, but we didn't see him a whole lot because he was running his business in town, and he also started dating a couple years before that, this beautiful girl named Jennifer. And so he was spending a lot of time at his store and a lot of time with her, but he'd always come back and he'd rest for Shabbat. So on the Shabbat, it was usually Mitch and Gina and me, and we were all studying, we were watching some of these videos, or we were reading in the Word, or we were talking about these other things that we had studied and we had learned. And a lot of times, all on the same day, within hours, we had all come to the same revelation, and it was amazing when we'd all get together and just start talking about all this and say, this is what I got, and I got that too, and it was really something. But we had learned by leaps and bounds, and realizing that when churchianity says, that's the old, we have the new. We have the new deal now, because they're listening to the religion and to their preachers who think the Messiah set up something different. Well, they're not paying attention, because the Messiah didn't set up anything different, because there's no new list of rules in the covenant. So anyway, that was very exciting, realizing what was still relevant for us for today, and now everything was making sense. But we all came into the Torah covenant at the same time, Mitch and Gina and I, and it was really a wonderful thing. And it wasn't long after that that Mitch had moved out. But I also want to say at this point in time, when Mitch started coming into covenant, started coming into Torah, and started keeping all these feasts, when him and Jennifer got together, well, Jen hadn't signed up for this because Mitch wasn't doing that. So he didn't really say anything, but I'm always worried this whole time, is she really want to marry our son? Because he's different now. He's doing all this stuff. So at first Jen seemed tolerant of this whole thing. Then after a while she got used to it, and then she accepted it, and now she's about as into it as anybody can be. And it's such a beautiful thing to see her come from her background being very secular to now her walking in Torah, and to know that she's in covenant is such a beautiful thing. And so they got married a little over a year ago, and we feel very special to have her part of our family. But anyway, I had been doing this internet ministry for quite a few years, and I was on quite a few different internet forums, and people kept having the same arguments and the same questions, and so I'd have to counter them with scripture. So I started saving all of these things that I had typed up and were on computer files, to where if there was somebody ever asked a question about that, I could just look it up under this heading and repost, bam, and that had all the scripture in there to prove my points about how we are to obey. And so after doing all these long replies, and after tweaking them and making them a little bit better and getting them to where they made sense, suddenly I was left with all of these files and all of these chapters, and I put them all together, and I got Exit Babylon out of it. That's where that book come from. And then Exit Babylon 2 came shortly thereafter. And we had toyed with the idea, after we had learned for quite a few years and come into Torah, we had toyed with the idea of making videos. But we had a very good Facebook presence, and we were promoting Beit Tefillah Publishing, because I had written Exit Babylon 1 and 2 and did the Shemitah book, and Mitch did the wonderful book on how to keep all the Moedim, or all the feasts of Leviticus 23. It's a very popular book, and it helped people, and I wished we'd have had that when we first started. So that book has done very well. Now he's doing another one on the ancient historians. I'm in the middle of writing Exit Babylon 3. So we're very busy with Beit Tefillah Publishing. So we started to put together Beit Tefillah Productions, and we knew we'd wanted to do that for a while, to have, different teachings on video. And so we got all this camera equipment and started roughing it out. So Mitch and I had decided that we wanted to both be on camera, and that's how we were going to do the majority of our teachings. We knew that I was going to do some by myself and he was going to do some by himself. So we knocked out like 3 or 4 really good videos, like an hour or so long, with both of us sitting there. Then when it came time to edit them, the sound was so terrible you couldn't hear what we were saying. We had to throw them all away. So that was a mess. We put a lot of work into that. We're going to eventually probably redo them someday. We still have most of the scripts for that. So that brings us to the present day, with me sitting right here with Beit Tefillah Productions doing these videos. Somebody told me 13 years ago, said, Scott, you know what? You're going to end up selling your house in Florida. You're going to give up your career. You're going to give up your hobbies. You're going to give up the state. And you're going to move to rural Arkansas in the middle of nowhere. And you're going to be writing Torah books. And you're going to be doing videos. I'd have told them they were certifiable. I would not have believed that for a minute. It's been many, many years, over 30 years, since I broke my back in many places. But before it got too bad with my age and arthritis, because I walk a little slower and a little stiffer now, I was very blessed to be able to do a lot of different things. Didn't have a lot of money, but I was able to leave the country a few times and go to quite a few places. And Elohim let me entertain a lot of the stuff that I always wanted to do, even before I was in covenant. I'm not sure why. He blessed me. He said, I'll have mercy while I have mercy on, and maybe he let me do that because he knew I was his before I knew it. I don't know. I don't have any explanation for it. But with everything I did, all these wonderful things that I did, the real excitement didn't start for me until I came into Torah, because that's where you find life. That's where you find it for this life and for the next one. And that is the greatest treasure there is. We're very blessed that my wife and I are walking the same path together, that we're Echad, and that our only child, our son, and his wife are walking Echad. And so together, and they just live 20 minutes from us, together we can gather and we can be together for feasts, and we can have fellowship. And we have other friends that are not really real close to us, but aren't that far away, that we can gather. We're all on different spots on the path, but that's okay too. I know a lot of people don't have anybody. And my heart goes out to all of you who are truly walking by yourself in this. And you're not alone. See my latest video on that. For all those who feel alone in their walk in Torah. Because you're not alone. And but we lost almost everybody else in our family. We lost all of our friends once we started obeying the Creator. And most of these people are Bible-believing people. And isn't that odd? Once you start obeying the Creator and doing what He said to do, these people think you're crazy. And yet they read the Bible and they claim to love Him, and yet we're the ones who are wrong? So they think disobedience is the key? I don't know. There's a lot that I can't do anymore, but I try to focus on what I can do. I can sit here, I can do videos, I can write books, I can share this with you. But I have many great memories and photographs of a lot of things that the Creator allowed me to do in my lifetime. And I thought I would end this little video with a photo montage of some of the stuff that I was able to do. And by watching that, you'll see a little bit of what makes me, me. So as always, thanks for being a part of Beit Tefillah Productions. Shalom to everybody scattered around the 4 corners of the earth. Thanks for being here with me, and have a wonderful day.